Hey, how's it going, everybody? And welcome back to the 2025 preseason deep dive series where we pick things back up and picking up on a conference that has won the last couple of national championships and has a legitimate shot to go ahead and make it a three-peat, which is something that we haven't seen for a long time in the Big Ten. So, needless to say, I am extremely excited to go ahead and jump into what is currently the largest FBS conference in all of college football. And if you guys are excited as I am, I need you to make sure you go ahead, do a couple of things for me. Hit that like button. And then you have a real opportunity to be an OG of the channel as well, because I'm only recording this at a time where I've only have like 10 subscribers at most at the moment, so you have a chance to be an OG. Plus, feel free to leave a comment down below letting me know what conference you would like to see me break down next here on the channel. But with that being said, we're not going to waste too much more time. Let's go ahead and jump into this conference. So first, let's go ahead and talk about the Big Ten from just a general overarching standpoint, and then I'll dive a little bit deeper and provide that 50,000 foot view of each individual team going into the season. Because, listen, the Big Ten football season promises to be potentially a landmark campaign, blending the traditions with the transformation of the conference as it starts to really fully embrace those West Coast teams that did join the Big Ten back in 2024. That is Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Washington. So the Big Ten is the first conference to actually span coast to coast. And some of those teams, made an impact right away, such as an Oregon, who was their #1 seed in the college football playoff. And then USC and Washington are also a couple of other teams that are starting to build momentum as they prepare for the upcoming college football season as well. This is also the conference, as I mentioned, produced the last two national champions, and they're going to try to extend that current streak of excellence as they look to challenge the overall supremacy of the SEC, as most folks in college football media would agree that the SEC is the top conference in college football. It's just a matter of how much that gap is, and there might be some reason to believe, thanks to some of those West Coast additions, that gap might be closing. Now, defending national champion Ohio State does return as one of my preseason favorites to make another deep run, despite the fact that they are bringing in a brand new quarterback. However, there is still plenty of talent on this roster as they do bring in elite studs like Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, anchoring both sides of the ball, and both of those players represent arguably the most impactful players in all of college football on each side of the ball. However, with that being said, the race is going to be far from being a one-sided affair, because Penn State, behind the veteran quarterback Drew Aller, and arguably one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football, he's going to have a loaded backfield as well that's going to be positioned to challenge for its first Big Ten championship since 2016, while Oregon, fresh off of its Big Ten debut, looks to reload behind the promising young quarterback in Dante Moore and a dominant defensive front as well. Dante Moore previously starting at UCLA a couple of years ago. Beyond the first tier of those elite programs, so we do have a very interesting second tier that we'll keep an eye on. Programs like Indiana and Illinois that are considered to be on the rise, particularly with the Indiana Hoosiers, led by second-year coach Curt Cignetti. He is entering a wave of momentum after finishing with an 11-1 regular season record that completely shocked the college football world. I think it would have been a good year for Indiana if they just made a bowl game. So to finish that strong and make the college football playoff was certainly a complete surprise. They're going to look to continue to build upon that success with some new faces, such as the quarterback transfer out of Cal in Fernando Mendoza, who does have that pivotal starting experience at the power conference level. As for Illinois, they are featuring a really good starting quarterback of their own in Luke Altmaier, one of the more experienced quarterbacks in this conference, a physical defense, and just in general, one of the most experienced teams in all of college football, they'll also look to be a potential spoiler in what could be one of the deeper seasons in the Big Ten as well. And that is even before we even get into the Michigan Wolverines entering year number 2 under Sherrone Moore. They are looking to maintain its physical identity even with all of the turnover that did happen on that roster, including multiple NFL draft picks on that defense that is no longer on the team. Hopefully, the late season clash with Ohio State and Alabama can parlay that into success for the 2025 season. That Michigan-Ohio State game guarantees to be cinema at the end of the year regardless though. However, the teams in this conference also have its fair share of questions that it needs to answer between now and when the season does officially kick off on August 28th, which is a Thursday night, whether it be how quarterback competitions shape out at the marquee programs such as Ohio State, Michigan, and USC, as they, at least to date of this recording, they have not named a starting quarterback yet, or how do teams like Wisconsin and Iowa deal with some of the more demanding schedules in the entire Big Ten. Finally, can this conference continue to be a forefront of college football playoff representation after being the only conference to be able to say that they sent at least 4 teams to the 12-team CFP, which of course is the most in all of college football. So as new rivalries continue to form with the additions, coast-to-coast showdowns within the conference, as well as multiple national championship contenders at the top, the Big Ten season for the 2025 campaign should deliver one of the more thrilling and somehow also more unpredictable years in the league's story history, which now takes us into how did I go about ranking these teams within the Big Ten. Now, before I get into this next part, I do have a little bit of a snippet down in the description to let you know what each of the numbers that you're about to see for all 18 teams in the Big Ten represent down in the description. So, just with that little bit of a caveat taken care of, let's go ahead and start taking a look at what that number 18 team is, who's at the bottom of the Big Ten. And it shouldn't surprise too many people about this particular analysis, so to speak, but the Purdue Boilermakers, I do have them at the very bottom at number 18. Now, what I will say is that I'm more positive about Purdue beyond 2025. I think the hiring of Barry Odom and getting him from UNLV was a strong hire, and I have full confidence that he's going to be able to turn this program around in due time. It's just that with the cupboard being, frankly, as empty as it currently is at Purdue, I think that it is going to take some time, at least a year. So, for the sake of the 2025 campaign, I'm really not expecting much. I do expect a slight improvement over the disaster that was that 1-11 season that we witnessed this time last year, but not much better. I have them going as a 2-10 team, not being able to win a single Big Ten conference game once again. Now, moving on to a team that might have a little bit more hope up next for my 17th ranked team, I do have the Northwestern Wildcats. This was an offensive unit last year that struggled mightily to put points on the board, as they just averaged 18 points per game last year, which you're not going to win a lot of games doing that. So they did end up addressing those issues in the portal. They did grab the former SMU starting quarterback in Preston Stone and bring him up to Evanston, Illinois. And on top of that, also bringing someone from a high-level FCS program in Griffin Wild, one of the receivers on this new-look Northwestern team. He is a transfer from South Dakota State. Meanwhile, the defense should be fine with the 6 defensive starters that are coming back, but I only have them as a 3-9 team in spite of the improvements that I mentioned earlier And that is really because of I'm just skeptical of what kind of Preston Stone that we're going to get. If this is the 2023 Preston Stone that we primarily see over the course of the season, I genuinely do believe that we will see them surpass the 3-9 expectations that I have. But the most recent version of what I saw from Preston Stone was somebody that did struggle early on in the football season last year, then gets benched in favor of Kevin Jennings, and then the rest is history over at SMU. So that's our most recent memory of Preston Stone, and that is a big reason why I have them at 3-9 as of right now, because I don't know if, we're going to see that 23 version of Preston Stone. Which, speaking of pivotal quarterbacks potentially in this conference, I'll now jump into my 16th ranked Big Ten squad, and that is going to be the Maryland Terrapins. Now, Maryland, I think, is going to be one of the more fascinating teams to watch that is considered part of this bottom tier of the Big Ten, because they do have the true freshman quarterback, Malik Washington, who at the time of recording, I will say, is currently slated to start. However, I have some extreme concerns about their offensive line, as well as the entire defense, really riddled with question marks around that entire defensive outfit. So, having a true freshman quarterback starting under center with a suspect offensive line really could create a potential disaster, although sometimes you also see a thing where sometimes pressure creates diamonds. That could truly be the case for Malik Washington, but because of the fact that they are going to be starting a true freshman quarterback behind a questionable offensive line, and then a defense that at best will likely be inconsistent this year, I also have Maryland going 3-9 because of that. Now, at number 15, on the other hand, a quarterback, this team does actually have a quarterback that doesn't have those same question marks necessarily, and that is UCLA, which you would think they're the biggest offseason winners, considering they were able to get the transfer out of Tennessee in Nico Amiave, I believe is how you pronounce it. I probably butchered it, so if I apologize. For those that are either UCLA or Tennessee fans watching this, let me know how that's pronounced in the comment section. I would appreciate that. But even though this is also a team under Deshaun Foster that did finish strong last year, they finished 4-2 in its final 6 games, there are still multiple question marks throughout this roster as well, such as receiver, offensive line, and also essentially in the entire defense, with defense being a core identity for a lot of these teams in the Big Ten. UCLA possibly not really having one could certainly be an issue, although Nico could hide all of those flaws if he does live up to his potential. But that is the real caveat in all of this, right? You have to think that Nico has to reach his potential and do it at a place where, frankly, the offensive system at UCLA is not necessarily as quarterback friendly as it's going to be at, let's just say, Tennessee, for example, considered a friendlier offense out there on the East Coast. So this is another team that I have going 4-8, but I think that not all of those projected wins that I have what I even consider to be layups, right? Because they do have to go on the road against UNLV, and I think UNLV is one of the best group of 5 teams in the country. I would rank them probably in the top 5 if I did a G5 specific poll right now. They go on the road to play them, and yes, I do have them beating UNLV, but that is certainly also a losable game, in my opinion, as well. Could be a difficult year once again for UCLA, finishing 4-8. Meanwhile, switching back over to the East Coast for my 14th ranked team in the Big Ten, we now jump into the Michigan State Spartans under the direction of Jonathan Smith. Now, if Jonathan Smith wants to get this Michigan State squad to a bowl game in year number 2, what he'll need two things to happen. First, he is going to need transfers on frankly both sides of the ball to produce right away. And then you also have Aiden Childs, who you brought in from the transfer portal last year from Oregon State after making the jump as the head coach of Oregon State, now jumping over to be a part of this Michigan State coaching staff. You need him to grow and develop as well. But even though there is certainly those question marks that I mentioned earlier, I am certainly excited, on the other hand, to watch Nick Marsh, who is currently someone that is under the radar a little bit. You don't see him talked about in terms of who is some of the better receivers in the Big Ten, but at the same time, he could make some noise this year and definitely enter that conversation, so long as we do see that development from Aiden Childs. So I don't know. There is too many questions, and the Big Ten is simply too good for me to slot Michigan State into a bowl game. So I do have them finishing just short at 5-7, but put together another good recruiting class, and I think Michigan State can certainly take a bigger jump in year number 3. Also looking to try to make a jump from a historical standpoint is the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, who I now have as my 13th ranked team in the Big Ten. They are coming off 2 consecutive winning seasons, which is a positive sign for this program for sure. But if they want to make a 3rd consecutive winning season to happen, they'll need a defense that allowed well over 6 yards per play to be significantly better, because we're talking about a defense that was essentially giving up a first down every other play. That's simply something that can't happen, especially as you get into Big Ten conference play. Granted, that's something that you can get away with maybe when you're playing most of your non-conference schedule, and the non-conference schedule is nice for Rutgers. They'll also need Athan Kalamanis to be more of an impact player for the Scarlet Knights offense, now that they can't rely on Kyle Monangai to get things going on the ground, because he also left for the NFL. Not that the backfield is going to be completely bare. They do have the FAU transfer in CJ Campbell, as well as Antoine Raymond on the squad as well, but it's not something that you can necessarily rely on in terms of relying on that ground game. You need to have a little bit more balance. So right now, I also have Rutgers, just like Michigan State, finishing 5-7, with the possibility of making a bowl game, depending on what happens in the Iowa matchup, because of the fact that it is at home. Even though I think Iowa is the better team, Rutgers being at home, to me, indicates that Iowa can certainly lose on the road to Rutgers towards the back end of the season, I believe. So a 5-7 team with a potential to possibly be 6-6, go bowling, and then from that bowl game try to get that 3rd consecutive winning season from there. Now, up next at number 12, another red-colored school in the Wisconsin Badgers. Listen, this Wisconsin Badgers team actually might be better, but it's probably not going to even reflect in the final record for this team, because of how difficult Wisconsin's schedule is going to be. They are going to have a top 10 strength of schedule when it's all said and done, and already the vibes are not necessarily great at Wisconsin. They're coming off of their first losing season since 2001. But with that being said, if new offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes and the Maryland transfer in Billy Edwards, if both of those guys can get on the same page, then there is a possibility that they could surpass even my best case scenario, where Wisconsin at least finishes 5-7 and get back into bowl game, which, given how Luke Fickell's tenure has gone at Wisconsin, then that, I think, going to a bowl game at least, given how tough the schedule is going to be, I think making a bowl game is the benchmark if he does want to keep his job, because Wisconsin has struggled to find its identity, which is something that you would never say about Wisconsin, at least during my lifetime, right? So there's Wisconsin right there at number 12. But then the next couple of teams that I want to talk about certainly have some dark horse potential for sure. And so we're going to start with number 11 at Minnesota. Minnesota, yes, I have them power ranked as my 11th best Big Ten team right now, but this is a team that you look at this roster a little bit deeper. There is definitely a lot to like about BJ Fleck's squad, even though it is only returning 10 starters, right? They have Drake Winsey at quarterback, who shows tremendous promise, and he's going to be aided by Darius Taylor, who is back with this team, who could very well be one of the best running backs in the entire Big Ten. Not to mention the new defensive coordinator on this roster in Danny Collins will benefit from having a solid front seven, as well as Koi Parich patrolling things in the secondary. Could be one of the best ball hawks in the entire conference, but because he plays for Minnesota, not as many people know about him. And of course, PJ Fleck, I just think he's a wonderful head coach. I really like what he does. You know, he's just a model of consistency at Minnesota. So there's going to be a large jump here between the 12th and 11th team's record, but I have them going 9-3. The schedule is certainly very navigable, but there is a scenario where they may slip a little bit more and get back to that 8-4 stance like they were at last year, around where they were last year. And that is because they do play Nebraska at home. I do have that as a toss-up, leaning towards Minnesota because of the home field advantage, but certainly a losable game as well. Now, speaking of Nebraska, I do have them next as my 10th best team in the Big Ten. And really, there's only 4 words to describe this Nebraska team. Year free, Matt Rule, okay? You know what he's done at Baylor and what he's done at Temple as well when it comes to that 3rd season. So it could be a huge season for Nebraska. Plus, he does have Dylan Raiola, who was a former 5-star prospect quarterback. He started for a whole year, and he'll be expected to show some growth under new offensive coordinator Dana Holgorsen, who comes over from Houston, no longer in a head coach role, but simply calling the offense. While the receiving core for Nebraska should also look better than what it did last year, because they did bring in the Kentucky transfer of Dane Key and the Cal transfer in the Sia Hunter. So that would mean that Dylan Raiola is going to have more people to actually be able to throw this football team, throw the football to. At the end of the day, though, if we are going to see Nebraska reach its full potential, it's going to really depend on how the new defensive coordinator in John Butler does in rebuilding that defensive front. I think that's going to really determine what truly is the ceiling and how much is that year-free jump going to be, right? So because we know that there's going to be a year-free jump, we kind of shot in the middle here between what we think is the best case scenario and what the worst case scenario is for Nebraska this upcoming season. And we go with a very respectable 9-3 that's going to get them ranked in the top 25 at the end of the season, and will at least give them some kind of some consideration for the college football playoff. I think there's a couple of toss-up games in there. At home, for example, against Michigan, on top of playing USC and Iowa at home on top of that, plus that road game against Minnesota on the road, that I think could truly determine how successful Nebraska's season is going to be. If they do finish that best case scenario at 11-1, we'll see them in the college football playoff and potentially hosting either a home playoff game or getting that top 4 seed if they live up to their full potential. But if there's absolutely no growth under John Butler, if they even take a step back, that growth in terms of the overall record could be very minimal, and they finish with a slightly above average 7-5, which would be considered a little bit disappointing in the eyes of many Nebraska fans, I would imagine. So we'll go ahead and start getting into the upper half of the Big Ten now as we jump into the next team that I have ranked in my Big Ten rankings. Now coming in at number 9, it's the Washington Huskies. Now that Jedd Fisch has been able to navigate his first season with the significant roster turnover that happened in light of Kalen DeBoer deciding to leave Washington in order to take the Alabama job, we're now at a point where this team could now make some more noise going into the new season, as Damon Williams can certainly capture some more attention this fall. Quietly, he might be one of the better quarterbacks in this conference. Surely more people will know about him by the time this season is over. While you have guys like Jonah Coleman, who will seek to have the privilege of being named All-American as well. So a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball. Finally, while Ryan Walters didn't work out as the head coach of Purdue, and I think that's prevalent by that 1-11 season that he was responsible for last year, he is more than capable of being a strong defensive coordinator for the Huskies, particularly because he is, frankly, going to have more talent to work with in Seattle versus what he did up in at Purdue. So again, another team that I think is going to split the gap here. This is an 8-win team, in my opinion. I think they split one of Illinois or Wisconsin on the road, but those two games are certainly toss-up games for me, so they do have the potential to get up to that 9-win team that would get them at least as a Big Ten team, and the Big Ten and the SEC will have more benefit of the doubt when it comes to the college football playoff at-large bids. Getting it to 9-3 will at least give them some consideration, although they could also drop both games and drop to 7-5. But it seems like a very stable team, going to make stable progress. Not as much progress as Nebraska, but definitely a step forward regardless. Up next, and I think this might be some of the one of the hotter takes that I have on the Big Ten, based upon the Twitter graphic that I released that details record predictions for every single team in college football. So I have Iowa at number 8. Before I get into the record analysis, you can see it on screen. I have them at 6-6. Hear me out. Yes, I do understand that this should still be one of the better defensive units in the entire conference, but you do also have to replace 2-star linebackers in Nick Jackson and Jay Higgins. Plus, the offensive side of the ball is always going to be a question mark at Iowa, even though they do have a strong offensive line. They do have the South Dakota transfer, Mark Gronkowski. So on paper, the offense should be a little bit more balanced in terms of having an actual passing attack. For me, I just have to wait and see what the offensive scheme and the offensive coaching looks like, because that's going to be a large factor in the success of this Iowa team in the fall. They'll be in a lot of games this year, but I am not sold necessarily on what they got going on up there offensively. Plus, there's a lot of toss-up games, more than what Iowa fans realize. They go on the road to play against Iowa State for the Cy-Hawk Trophy rivalry. They also play Wisconsin, Rutgers, and Nebraska all on the road. Not to mention they also have Indiana, who, yes, they do have it at home. These are all losable games, so there is a worst case scenario where the season just completely falls flat. They don't even make it to a bowl game. I think they scrape by, and if they do win all of those toss-up games, this is also another 9-3 team as well. I just have to see the offense be able to put together consistent passing mechanics. If I can see that, I'll be a lot more sold on Iowa, but so far, I'm not as high as Iowa as I know many other people certainly are with those additions to the offensive side of the ball. Now, moving on over to my 7th ranked team in the Big Ten, we move on to the USC Trojans, which, I'm not going to lie, last year was probably seen as a disappointment in the eyes of many USC fans, given what we did end up seeing in the beginning of the season when they're able to pull off that upset against a team at the time that was ranked in the top 25 in LSU on a neutral site field. So last year was disappointing, and with that additional context as well, the pressure is certainly beginning to mount on Lincoln Riley. But what I can say is that there is a significant amount of energy that is at least happening off of the field with their recruiting and other talent acquisition methods. I think that has really proved dividends in terms of the energy around the USC program, but all that won't necessarily matter if they can't turn close losses into close wins. That was one of the biggest problems that USC had. They just couldn't close. Now, Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon do make up a dynamic receiving duo that will help aid in the development of your new starting quarterback in Jaden Maiava, who did start towards the back of the season and showed promise. Plus, the defense should be better in year number 2 under defensive coordinator D'Anton Lynn as well. So USC is the first team that I have in my Big Ten deep dive that I initially do have power ranked in the top 25. But this is also a team that could finish in that 8-4 stratosphere, which it would still be an improvement over what we saw from USC last year, where they barely made a bowl game. I do think there's a couple of toss-up games to watch if you're a USC fan, and that is the Michigan game as well as Nebraska on the road. If they can win both those games, 9-3 is certainly possible, but they can certainly drop down to a 7-5 if they also drop both of those games as well. But now the biggest dark horse that everyone's been talking about in the offseason, one of the more popular dark horse picks at number 6, I do have the Illinois Fighting Illini. 16 returning starters come back from a team that won 10 games last year, including the bowl game where Brett Bielema famously got in the head of Shane Beamer in that bowl game matchup, winning that Big Ten versus SEC matchup. So having all of those starters coming back on a team that was already pretty good last year does provide that genuine confidence that this team has what it takes to possibly make the college football playoff this year. Luke Allmeyer is back to lead the offense behind an experienced offensive line, while the defense has multiple superstars as well, such as Xavier Scott and Gabe Jacobs. An early season showdown with Indiana on the road will probably set the tone in terms of how this season can go, which I do have that as one of the 2 losses that I have for Illinois. But if you could convince me that Illinois can win that game too, that is certainly possible. But I do have them as a 10-2 team right now, splitting the difference between the home game that they do have against Ohio State, which again is going to be one of the best teams in the country, but at the very least you do have Ohio State at home, but you also have Washington on the road as well, making that cross-country trip that could make things more difficult because of the travel logistics between traveling from Illinois to Washington for a conference game. So it's actually possible that Illinois actually doesn't get any better than last year, and they go 9-3, and they'll go for their 10th win of the season for the bowl game. But I have them splitting the difference. I think they at least beat Washington on the road at 10-2, and then if they pull off that upset against Ohio State as well, that would guarantee Illinois into the conference championship, in my opinion, and of course be a lock to make the college football playoff if that 11-1 record does happen, because you're not going to let an 11-1 team out, especially if they come from the Big Ten. It's just not going to happen. Now, moving on to the top 5, we have a team that we actually just kind of glossed over recently, the Indiana Hoosiers. You know, finding a way to win 11 games and make the college football playoff again. It's going to be a little bit more of a difficult task here in year number 2. However, I don't actually expect to see much of a full fall off from Indiana, even though they are going to be having a little bit more difficult schedule once they enter conference play. As we talked about earlier, Cal transfer Fernando Mendoza should be productive in Cincinnati's offense, as he's supported by plenty of talent and experience among the rest of the offensive outfit for the Indiana Hoosiers. Plus, it certainly doesn't hurt to bring back some of the best defenders in the entire conference, such as Malachi Kamara, Aiden Fisher, and D'Angelo Pons, which is helpful when the depth behind those players could be certainly questionable, but that being said, Kurt Signetti is way ahead of schedule compared to maybe what the expectation was when he first left James Madison to take this job. So, do they get to that 11-1 mark? I doubt it. I think that would be a little bit rich, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibility for me that Indiana does finish with a 10-win season once again. I think it is going to hinge on how they do in their road game against Iowa, because playing at Kinnick Stadium is one of the more intimidating and underrated environments in this conference. So they could slip a little bit further than 10-2, but I think that this is a team that could win double-digit games once again. That's certainly possible. Now, keeping it moving within top 5 is my number 4 team in the Big Ten, which is the Michigan Wolverines at this point. And this is in spite of the off-field issues in wake of the cheating scandal with Connor Stallions, and how much did Sharon Moore know about it. So there has been some off-field distractions happening with this Michigan program, but they are at least on the field carrying significant momentum for a couple of different reasons. You know, they're able to get Bryce Underwood to flip from LSU to Michigan, and he's someone that probably will start day one for this Michigan Wolverines squad, plus being able to find a way to beat both Ohio State and Alabama without really having a functional passing game to speak of. The fact that we are able to win both of those games was a minor miracle. But how well does Sharon Moore and new offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey, how do both of those guys do in guiding the true freshman sensation? That's going to be pivotal in terms of the success of this team in 25. But I still think that this defense is going to be among the best in the Big Ten, even though I do acknowledge there is multiple starters that were on that team last year, particularly on the defensive line, that did depart for the NFL. But we know what the identity of Michigan is. They're a physical team. I had them going 9-3, but all of the games on their schedule, in my opinion, are certainly winnable. You know, I think they're better than Oklahoma. I think they're better than Nebraska and USC as well, but because all those games are happening on the road is why I give pause to, you know, maybe considering them as any more than a double-digit win team. They do also have Ohio State. That's always going to be a tough game, and yes, they do have had Ohio State's number in recent memory, but that's not always going to be guaranteed. Anything can change on a dime. So yes, they do have the possibility of finishing the regular season undefeated. That is certainly possible. At the same time, though, I'm not necessarily counting on it, and I'm going a little bit closer to the floor because I just need to see Sharon Moore and Chip Lindsey vibe out before I can give a more productive and optimistic prediction for Michigan, which is why I'm going with them at 9-3 with potentially multiple losses in Big Ten conference play. Now, as for the elite of the elite, this is where we get into tier 1 of this particular conference, and it starts with the Oregon Ducks, who I have at number 3. Yes, I do understand that there is several key contributors that did win the Big Ten last year and did end up finishing with the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. I know that they're gone because of graduation, injury, transfer portal, whatever, but this is one of those teams under the direction of Dan Lanning that I still expect to see in the conversation to win it all. And I'm probably higher on Oregon than maybe most of the college football media consensus. But walk with me with a little bit here. First and foremost, we know that Dan Lanning has done an excellent job of recruiting and also acquiring talent through the transfer portal over the last few years. So, which sets him up to a point in terms of being able to reload versus rebuild necessarily. They do also have the former UCLA starting quarterback in Dante Moore, who started back in 23 for the UCLA Bruins, sat for a year, got a chance to learn the system under Dalen Gabriel, and then he also gets a quality backfield mate in Malachi Hughes. He arrives from Tulane to be able to provide that dynamic option in the backfield. So Dante Moore, even though he is getting the starting reins, is going to be that type of guy that is going to be able to have some help, so to speak. But the only concern that I do have is how does Dan Wenning backfill the departing talent from the lines of scrimmage when he only has 4 returning starters? So that is something where we'll see the recruitment and development of Oregon tested a little bit on the lines of scrimmage. I still think that this is an excellent team that will likely be back in the college football playoff once again, though, as they'll get to that 11-1 overall record. And I actually feel pretty safe about that determination, to be honest with you. But one of those losses that I think, actually the only loss that I think Oregon is going to have, is the number 2 team that I have in the Big Ten, and that is actually Penn State. They do come off as one of the biggest winners of the offseason by hiring Jim Knowles away from Ohio State, plus being able to convince not only Drew Lauer, but Katron Allen and Nick Singleton away from going to the NFL draft for one more year. So it does have a little bit of that Ohio State vibe that we saw from last year that ultimately led to an Ohio State national championship last year. And speaking of that national championship, they were so close to making a national championship game. They kind of blew it there towards the end against Notre Dame, but Penn State was definitely in it in the fourth quarter. They were certainly not left behind. Offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki, he should be able to help develop the future NFL prospect at quarterback, especially with an improved receiving core, which they did attack pretty aggressively in the portal, notably getting Trevor Pena from Syracuse. The loss of Abdul Carter, that is going to hurt, but Danny Dennis Sutton is ready to fill those extraordinarily big shoes as he looks to become the next great pass rusher to come out of Penn State. And it's another one of those teams which I do also have going 11-1. The only loss that I do have for Penn State is that they do have to go on the road against Ohio State, which, you know, the home field advantage does make a difference for me, which is why I have Penn State taking that loss against Ohio State during the course of conference play. Which means, as you guys may know, my number 1 team in the Big Ten does have to indeed be the Ohio State Buckeyes. Yes, I had them as my favorite to win the national, or not the national. Well, we'll see about that. We'll get to the college football playoff preview later on in the preseason deep dive. But listen, there's only 2 teams in college football history that have been able to repeat as national champions since 1998. That's Alabama and Georgia. I do believe by the time this year is over, I genuinely do think that Ohio State has what it takes to join that list. Yes, I do understand that they lost 15 players from last year's team to the NFL. That is a lot to lose, but at the same time, though, Ohio State, they are a team that does not rebuild. They always reload. They'll arguably have the best offensive and defensive players in the country in Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, which, I mean, those battles in practice between those two have to be absolutely legendary. Plus, they do have the former 5-star recruit from 2024 in Julian Sayin, who did get occasional mop-up duty, including in a couple of games that were played in the CFP. So, technically, Julian Sayin, that is someone that experienced playoff action. Really, the only question marks that I do have is, how does this team adjust to the new coordinators now that Brian Hartline is going to be promoted to the offensive coordinator after doing such a tremendous job as the wide receiver coach for so long for this Ohio State Buckeyes team? Also, arguably one of the best recruiters in the country, too. While Matt Patricia, on the other side, the defensive side of the ball, he's going to become your new defensive coordinator for Ohio State. And for this Ohio State squad, having someone with NFL experience coming to coach your defense, always a positive sign. It certainly doesn't hurt. So, as you can see, I do have Ohio State as my number 1 team in the nation to start things out. I think this is the type of team where, until they lose, they're the number 1 team in my mind. Plain and simple. Not to mention that there isn't possible hurdles that they're going to have to overcome. There are certainly multiple games on the schedule where they could certainly lose, and it certainly starts with that week 1 matchup that they have facing Texas at home. That is a toss-up game for me because so Ohio State and Texas is really interesting. I had Ohio State as more of my 1A, whereas Texas is a 1B. I did give Ohio State that #1 ranking because I did think that Ohio State had slightly more upside, but that is still a losable game to Texas. Not to mention they do go on the road against Illinois. That can certainly be a trap game that happens in the middle of the season. And of course, the big game between Ohio State and Michigan. Michigan has had Ohio State's number ever since the COVID pandemic happened. So can Ohio State get that first win against Michigan since 2019? They absolutely could, but at the same time, it is definitely fair to say that is a losable game. So there is a worst case scenario where Ohio State goes 9-3 this year and they do completely miss out on the college football playoff after winning the national championship last year, doing it as an 8 seed. But I think what's more likely to happen, to be honest with you, is I'm very high on Ohio State this year, and I think they do finish undefeated, making that 12-0 season happen and potentially competing for the #1 overall seed in the college football playoff when that rolls around. But with that being said, guys, that is actually going to be my final team to reveal. That is the Big Ten Conference in a nutshell. If you made it this far, first and foremost, y'all are the real MVP for doing that, as we are embarking on covering college football on more of a full-time and a more serious basis. So any feedback that you can give me certainly helps. If you enjoyed this video, though, breaking down the Big Ten Conference, feel free to hit that like button, as not only does that warm up my cold dead heart, but what it also does is that it pushes this video out to more passionate college football fans like yourself. And of course, you have a chance to be an A1 since day one, man. You can subscribe to the channel and be one of the first subscribers to College Football Red Zone. That can certainly happen. And of course, last but not least, hit me up in the comment section, man. I love hearing your guys' feedback, and let me know as well what conference you would like to see me break down next. But with that being said, I'm your host, Jake, of College Football Red Zone, heading out for a little while. I'll see you guys in a couple of days when we break down our very next conference, potentially. But with that being said, hopefully y'all are out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.